Good evening and welcome to Colorado Decides, a joint production of Colorado Public Television, CBS 4, KOA News Radio, and the Colorado Sun. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for joining us. Joining me is Sean Boyd, political specialist at CBS 4, and political analyst Eric Sonderman. Tonight, we continue our general election season looking at the major races on November's ballot. This debate will feature the major party candidates running for Attorney General of Colorado. Joining us for the next 30 minutes are George Brauchler, the Republican candidate, and Phil Weiser, the Democratic candidate. Okay, we have limited time, so let's get started. Sean, would you like to ask the first question?
Sure, thanks. I want to start out by talking about the role of the Attorney General, and the two of you have different takes on this. George, you've said the AG is here to defend state law, state constitution. It's not partisan, personal views shouldn't be involved. Phil, you're running in opposition to President Trump's agenda and have named 4 or 5 different federal lawsuits that you think you would join right away. So is this job a partisan job?
The job's not partisan. The job is about the people of Colorado. And as the people's lawyer, you protect people and their rights. Let's take the Affordable Care Act. Under that law that protects all of us, you can't be discriminated against if you have a pre-existing condition. The difference is, as Attorney General, I'll protect Coloradans from that discrimination. I will defend and enforce that law at a time when our federal Justice Department is acting in a way that's lawless. They're not defending and enforcing the law. The state AG doesn't only defend state law. The state AG defends federal law and its protections. Another example is the census. Colorado will be hurt if the Steve Bannon plan goes forward to basically ask people about their immigration status on the census, something the Census Bureau says would lead to an undercount and would violate the Constitution. As someone who's sworn to uphold the Constitution, both federal and state, as Attorney General, it's my job to defend the people of Colorado and stand up for their rights.
The lawsuits that you've talked about joining are lawsuits Democratic AGs have filed. Would you join lawsuits with Republican AGs?
When a Republican AG identifies something that's happened that's illegal, that hurts Coloradans, I will be quick to join. I'll give you an example. Oklahoma AG, a Republican, has filed a lawsuit against Purdue Pharma, calling their actions causing the opioid epidemic evil, because they knew OxyContin was highly addictive, and they lied to people about it. They need to be held accountable. That'll be a lawsuit on a bipartisan basis to address the opioid epidemic, something I'm committed to do to protect the people of Colorado.
So, George, are there no federal lawsuits that you would join if you became AG?
Pass. No, I'm kidding. There are probably some lawsuits that I would, but they'd have to have a direct impact on this particular state. And let me go back to the question that you'd asked before, which is, should this be a partisan position? The Constitution says the process here is going to be partisan to the extent that we continue to have an active Republican and Democrat party. But just like district attorney for 1 million Coloradans, once you become elected, I'm not a Republican DA. I'm not a Democrat DA. I am the district attorney that has an ability to see past whether they're Republican victims or Democrat constituents. They're just Coloradans who are entitled to equal protection under the laws and due process if they run afoul of those laws. As Attorney General, my focus is not going to be to run out around the country and try to figure out ways to thwart any federal government policy with which I disagree, but the ones that directly impact this state. My concern was saying, hey, I'm going to vigorously enforce the Affordable Care Act, and I'm going to sue to make sure it is. Well, what do we do with the federal immigration law? Would it be equally appropriate for an attorney general to sue the federal government and say, you are not vigorously enforcing immigration law? I don't want to pick and choose. I want that choice to have been made by Coloradans when they impose those rules, regulations, and laws upon the Attorney General's office.
Coloradans often vote into office, maybe a Democratic governor, Republican AG, or vice versa. So if we have a Democratic governor, AG's role is to defend the governor's office. So would you defend all the decisions that come out of that governor's office?
All the decisions is too broad. Listen, my conversation with a Governor Polis will be the same as it would be with a Governor Stapleton. And that is to say that as your attorney, if you have a policy that you want to implement, even if I disagree with it, as long as it's lawful, as long as it's constitutional, you can expect me to provide expert legal opinions on how to accomplish it. But if you try to do something that runs afoul of the law, runs afoul of our Constitution, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you should expect me to stand up and resist that.
Eric, you want to get with our next question?
Sure. Thanks, Dominic. Let's talk about just the whole definition of the job and what it is the Attorney General does. To watch your respective ads, gentlemen, you wouldn't always think we're running for the same office. Phil presents the office much more as an advocacy role. George, you present the office much more as the chief prosecutor of the state, given your background. Can you talk about what it is exactly that this office does for the people of Colorado and why you are better suited than your opponent for that task? George, we'll start with you.
Yeah, respectfully, those aren't my ads. My ads have largely been just pro-me. There are other third-party organizations, both on behalf of Phil and I think on behalf of the campaign, trying to get their person across the goal line. But those aren't my ads. Look, the bottom line is this. You are the chief enforcer of Colorado's laws, rules, and regulations. And so it is fair for any Colorado voter to ask, well, what's your background in enforcing Colorado's laws, rules, and regulations? What's your background being an actual lawyer in Colorado? And so to the extent that I've been able to talk about my experience, I've emphasized not just that I've been a local prosecutor who's handled some of the biggest cases in our history, but I've also been a criminal defense lawyer. I've beaten my own office in trial on the other side of the courtroom. I have been a civil plaintiff's lawyer. I've been a civil defense lawyer. I helped draft the Colorado Code of Military Justice. I have been a chief of military justice, a military defense attorney. I've dealt with administrative rules and regulations on the military side. I have tried cases at the municipal, state, federal, and military level. If you can do something on behalf of an advocate as small as a grandmother who I believe was mischarged and as big as a government like Colorado or U.S., I've done it. And the reason that matters is because in this position, you are that chief enforcer of the law. And it's very difficult to imagine a country picking as its Army's general someone who's never been in the trenches. Even though they may never pick up that rifle and fire at the front lines, they're going to be guiding the people that have. 300 attorneys, at least 100 of them deal with things like consumer protection and public safety. Every single job application I've seen indicates that one of the job qualifications is demonstrated courtroom competency, and I've done that.
And Phil, I think there was a bit of a shot in there at the end. Tell us why your background is the right background for this office.
An unfortunate shot, so I'll move from military to sports metaphors. I've played lots of positions on the legal playing field. I have been leading consumer protection cases at the Justice Department, going after people who'd harm consumers. I've worked on appellate matters, fighting for civil rights here in Colorado, and working at the Supreme Court for Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Byron White. I've worked on regulations here in Colorado at the Public Utilities Commission and nationally, advising President Barack Obama. I've advised governors here in Colorado, both Governor Hickenlooper and Governor Ritter. Those are 4 different positions. You don't have to have played every position to be a manager of a team. George has mostly played one position, being a criminal prosecutor. That's where most of his career has been. That's an important position, but less than 10% of what the office of the Attorney General does is criminal prosecution. We need someone who can protect people's rights, from water rights to civil rights, to consumer rights, to access to health care. The job is about protecting Coloradans. I've got the experience to do that, and that's what we need in our Attorney General.
Let's move on to a question from our friends at AARP. They have questions for all the candidates we offer with debates. Fear of becoming a victim of financial fraud is a top concern of older Coloradans and has been an emphasis of recent attorneys general. What will you do to preserve and enhance these protections for our seniors? Phil, let's start with you.
As I've mentioned, my career has been in consumer protection. I served President Barack Obama as the head of his transition team for the Federal Trade Commission. And elder abuse and protecting the elderly will be a core part of my consumer protection efforts, not just after the fact, going after wrongdoers, but before the fact, educating consumers. I'm going to beef up our community engagement and outreach. That's an important way we can equip people with the information they need so they're not taken advantage of by scams like phishing and leads to identity theft. And one thing I'm going to do with my expertise in technology is collaborate with other state AGs, with the Federal Trade Commission, because these scams using technology are really causing more and more identity theft and problems, particularly for the elderly. I've got the experience in this area, and I'll bring it on behalf of the people of Colorado.
George, your response.
Well, this is where experience matters again. I don't have to talk about what I'm going to do. I can talk about what I have done as district attorney. Now, in this giant jurisdiction about the size of the state of Connecticut, there are 4 big counties. Douglas is one of them. Douglas having one of the fastest growing senior populations in the United States. In fact, at one point, the fastest growing. And so what we did was we identified the problem, and I created an elder abuse unit inside the district attorney's office. Now, that unit tackles not just physical abuse, but economic and financial abuse. And one of the things that we've discovered is some of the barriers can't be cured by just education, because some of the people that are exploiting the elderly are family members or trusted members of a staff that they might invite in to care for them. Those are tricky and those are troubling, but we've been aggressive about protecting seniors who've been exploited that way. I think the other piece is, and just a month ago, we had another senior law day, super successful, down at the Schwab building there at about the corner of Lincoln and I-25, where we go out of our way to provide the most up-to-date education to as many seniors as possible, but not just for their protection, but to turn them into ambassadors to the rest of the senior community to help them identify problems, report that to the appropriate authorities, and let us take the appropriate steps. As Attorney General, I'm going to put that program on steroids.
Sean, let's keep it rolling. You're next.
So what is the biggest change that you would bring to this office that would affect the average Coloradan? And Phil, I think it's your turn to go first here.
I actually think it's George's turn, but I'm happy to go first if you want, Sean.
George, you want to take it? I'm sorry, I lost track.
Yeah, sure. I think we have to define average Coloradan too, because one of the things that I've discovered going around the state as much as I have is that everybody outside the Front Range here really feels like they're in a second Colorado. They're an afterthought, that every single decision that gets made under the Gold Dome starts and stops with the analysis of how's this going to affect Denver, maybe Boulder. And so one of the things that I've talked about doing is trying to break us out of that 1860s model of state government where everything has to be a horse and buggy ride away from the Capitol, and instead I want to decentralize the Attorney General's office, and we'll start with some criminal pieces, and maybe an investigator and a prosecutor, and put them out into regional offices around the state where they can provide direct, immediate support, not to supplant local law enforcement, but to support them in the things that we take for granted that we can do here, like a black market marijuana task force, like elder abuse, like some of the lower level environmental crimes that don't rate for the EPA or for the AG's office. The single biggest change that I can make is to make the AG's office spread out around the state where the dollars are collected, because I intend to be an Attorney General for all of Colorado.
Phil.
On George's proposal, it's a great 20th century idea. Before we had modern technology to have more branch offices. But in the 21st century, telecommuting is the way of the future. I want to have AG offices that are virtual so that people work different possible partners out of their homes. I want people across the state, and I will represent the whole state. The three big changes will be you'll have an advocate protecting you and your rights, access to health care, fair treatment of immigrants, reproductive rights for women. That's something our AG has an obligation to do. I'll do that. Number two, standing up for opportunities for all Coloradans, including the opioid epidemic. I've talked about that earlier. It's destroying families, lives, and communities. I will take on this case against the pharmaceutical companies. We'll get the money, and we'll support drug treatment so we're not putting opioid users in jail. That's what we need to do in Colorado. And finally, protecting our land, air, and water. We have a massive challenge with water here in Colorado. We have less of it on account of climate change. It's going to take leadership from our AG's office, leading the way in regulations and guidelines to make sure that we can manage our water without destroying agricultural communities. I'll do that as Colorado's next Attorney General.
Eric, you're up next.
Sure. Let's talk about transparency, openness in the Colorado judicial system. Been a number of impressive reports, Colorado Independent, the Denver Post over recent months, about the lack thereof in the judicial branch. I want to know where you stand on this issue of opening up to sunlight more of the Colorado judicial system, and specifically, would you support legislation to apply the Colorado Open Records Act to the judicial branch of government? Phil?
A few questions in there, Eric. On the Colorado Open Records Act, George, kudos to him here, has actually proposed via crowdsourcing some reforms that I think go in the right direction. I look forward to working with him on that. As for applying CORA to the judicial branch, I have to look at the details there. What judges do, and I've worked for some pretty wonderful judges, they deliberate. And those deliberations aren't in public. And so I need to see what those details are before I can get behind it. As for the reports you mentioned, those were reports critical of George's leadership. The Colorado Independent talked about the Owens case, where there was concerns about prosecutorial misconduct, and even the legal arguments themselves were pushed to be kept private, which strikes me as problematic, and that's something that, again, George was criticized for. As for the Denver Post reporting, that was a practice of suppressing case files, where the 18th Judicial District, George's district, suppressed case files more than 10 times any other jurisdiction. That happened for quite some time until the Denver Post investigated it, at which point the practice ended. I'm committed to transparency. We need to build trust in government. That's the way you do it.
And George, a response there, and particularly to the district court ruling that was critical of your office in a number of respects.
District court ruling?
I believe so.
No.
Judge Munch?
No, first off, in this particular area, it's unequivocal for me that KORA should be applied to the judicial branch. And that's not just something that I talk about here on TV or I have to go read about and deliberate on. I've advocated for this at the state legislature. 3 separate times, 3 separate years, I've advocated for bills that would expand KORA in one way or another over different aspects of the judicial branch, because I believe that if we're going to hold government accountable, we have to be able to question what they do and how they do it. And we can only do that through KORA. Now, as to the attacks by my opponent here, let's be clear. The Colorado Independent is anything but independent, and they have a completely anti-death penalty bent, have been since their inception. And their attack is not because of anything I've done, but because of the people who work for me and I inherited when I was elected to this office. That issue about keeping whatever that document is, the seal that Phil wants to make a big deal of, that's not George Brauchler saying it shouldn't be open to the public at this point in time. That's the district court judge and the Colorado Supreme Court, not once, but twice saying it. And as to the records from the Denver Post that they discovered, the part that Phil left out was the part where there's an editorial by the Denver Post praising my leadership on fixing that problem in the biggest jurisdiction in the state and suggesting that other district attorneys take a page out of my book and make sure that they do the same thing. I am firmly committed to KORA. I am firmly committed to transparency. And as Attorney General, I'm going to propose that the Attorney General be that next level of appeal so that when state agencies don't turn over information to you, to the public, you don't have to go hire an attorney and go to court. You can come to the AG and we'll look into it for nothing.
Sean, your turn.
So we've talked a little bit about how you would handle laws that you disagree with, maybe you interpret to be unconstitutional. With the new justices on the U.S. Supreme Court, there's a very real possibility that Roe v. Wade, the case that legalized abortion, could be overturned, which would send that back to the states, and the states would have to decide what to do with abortion. Phil, are we starting with you this time, or George?
This is George. Start with George.
So if this comes back to the states, you have said you will be a pro-life governor. You support limits on abortion. Do you support outlawing abortion? What would you do if the legislature said, you know what, no limits at all, no outlawing, we're going to keep things the way it is? Do you enforce that?
Absolutely, you do. I mean, listen, I'm Catholic, and by virtue of that, I'm pro-life. But I think what I've proven, too, even with my time in as district attorney, I don't intend to be the Catholic Attorney General for the state of Colorado. I intend to be the Attorney General for the state of Colorado, and I am wedded to the process that we have to govern ourselves. And to the extent that we vote to have a certain law that applies to the availability of abortions, and we make that decision, I'm going to uphold and defend that decision. I am not going to cherry pick one law over another as long as it is lawful and constitutional. I should say this, though. I do not anticipate Roe versus Wade being overturned. I don't know anybody that does, except fearmongers. Maybe over decades it might be death by 1,000 cuts, but I don't expect Roe versus Wade to be overturned because it is the law of the land, and I support the law of the land.
Would you encourage the legislature to outlaw abortion?
No, frankly, I don't think that's the Colorado way either. I think that there ought to be some limits on it. I don't think anybody I know in my life would support a last minute, last day, last week, last month abortion unless it resulted in saving the life of the mother. I don't think that Colorado would go all pro-life, and I certainly don't think Colorado would say abortion on demand at any time.
So what if they impose some limits on abortion?
This is a crucial issue. Colorado's going to pick the lawyer that represents the people of Colorado. That lawyer will have a choice to make when Roe versus Wade is reconsidered. Make no mistake, Justice Anthony Kennedy was the 5th vote protecting Roe versus Wade. He's gone and replaced by someone where there's lots of reasons to believe would be a vote to overturn Roe versus Wade. We have to ask ourselves, do we want our lawyer arguing for reproductive rights, arguing to preserve Roe versus Wade? You've noted George's prior statements on this, including questionnaires he's publicly submitted saying Roe versus Wade should be overturned. When we hire a lawyer to represent us, know what's at stake. We've actually got a website comparing positions between myself and George, including on reproductive rights. It's philforcolorado.com/contrast. This is a big area of contrast. I want to preserve Roe versus Wade. I believe this choice is one for women to make. And you're right, when George was running for governor, he was outspoken on this very issue and taking endorsements from folks like Ted Nugent. I don't believe once he becomes Attorney General, he is going to be able to say, okay, I'm not going to exercise my discretion, because it will be his discretion to pick whether Colorado is for preserving Roe versus Wade or overturning it.
And it could be death by 1,000 cuts with abortion, even if they don't overturn it.
Sure, but look, let's be honest. If Roe versus Wade is overturned, that doesn't make abortion illegal. Colorado wasn't an anti-abortion state before Roe versus Wade. I don't expect it to be afterwards. I'm anxious to see what other bag of negativity that my opponent has brought with him to the rest of the debate. But listen, I'm not here campaigning on taking away a woman's right to choose. I'm not here campaigning on trying to overturn Roe versus Wade. But it sounds like, based on your question and that non-answer, that Phil supports an abortion even up to the last possible minute of birth. I don't think that's the Colorado way, and I wouldn't support that.
That's not what I said. I said I'm for preserving Roe versus Wade. When I asked George directly this question, this is an important responsibility of the AG to argue on behalf of the people of Colorado about what we believe our rights are. George said he'd have to think about what he would do. I don't have to think about this. I believe in protecting reproductive rights and protecting Roe versus Wade.
Hang on. The question that was posed to me at Club 20 was, if there was a case that had the potential to turn over Roe versus Wade, would you file an amicus? And like any responsible attorney who's actually practiced law and not just taught it, I would want to see what the legal arguments were. I'd want the opportunity to look at the pleadings. I'd like an opportunity to research the cases. There is no knee-jerk gut reaction to any issue in the law, and that's a real attorney giving you that answer.
And I'm a real attorney who's worked on constitutional law, and I know constitutional law, which is why I don't have to think about what I would do. I know what I would do. I'd fight to preserve Roe versus Wade.
Gentlemen, we only have a couple minutes before our closing statements. Eric, your next question, I'll ask for a shorter answer.
Yeah, let's try to keep these to 30 seconds or thereabouts. This last exchange being an example, you're two of the more impressive candidates on this ballot, one from each party. And this is a very intelligent discussion. There's no question that our political system, I think both of you would acknowledge, is very troubled, if not broken these days. Tribalistic, polarized, whatever words you want to use. I'd love a 30-second idea from each of you, and I can't remember who's first. I think you are, Phil.
It's Phil's turn.
How do you personally and potentially as Attorney General become part of the solution instead of part of the problem in terms of repairing this political system?
I'm running because I care about our democracy and I care about Colorado. And when I'm your Attorney General, I will continue doing what I've done during this campaign, where I've been to every county. I will show up. I will listen. I will bring more empathy and creative problem solving, whether it's water, the opioid epidemic, or health care. We in Colorado have an obligation to make government work the way democracy is supposed to, being of the people, by the people, for the people. We do that here in Colorado. We give our nation something to look at about making government work on behalf of people.
Listen, I think it's a great question because, as you know, looking at Colorado, we used to describe ourselves as a third, a third, and a third, and that's not true anymore. I mean, we're up over 40% unaffiliated, 31% Dem, 29% Republican, and those numbers just keep getting more disparate. If you look at the millennials and younger group, they don't want to register as Republican or Democrat. They don't want to wear the jersey. They'd rather be unaffiliated because exactly the stuff that you're talking about. And I think what it requires is, even though we have this partisan process to get there, is someone who is willing to do the right thing independent of ideological point scoring or helping out one party or hurting another. Look, as district attorney, every single year I've had the opportunity to champion Democrat bills and sometimes fight against Republican bills because I thought they were the right thing to do. This year I've got two great examples as well. And that's what I do as Attorney General. I'm not looking to prop up one side or beat down another. What I'm looking to do is to be the best Attorney General for the state of Colorado, my home state, the state where everything in my life that's important to me is right here.
Half an hour goes by quickly, especially on this program. So, gentlemen, it's time for our closing statements. We offer each of our candidates a closing statement of 1 minute apiece. We flip a coin before the debate to determine order. George, you're up first for your 1 minute closing statement.
Thank you. Listen, the ballots are in the mailbox right now. By the time you get these, heck, you might have them out in front of you and getting ready to fill them out. This choice offers a pretty stark contrast between two people and two ideas. The part that I want you to focus on is not just the experience piece, and make no doubt, you are hiring a champion for Colorado. You are hiring an attorney, your attorney for Colorado. It should be someone that has experience, and I've only got 24 years of it, but 24 years of experience practicing law from just about every single angle where you can do battle on behalf of someone. But I think the other piece is important too. I don't intend to be an activist. I'm not going to pick and choose the laws that I'm going to defend. I'm not going to go out there and file lawsuits to help out someone outside the state of Colorado. Every decision I make will have you first and will be limited by our laws and our Constitution. Vote for me. You won't be disappointed.
Thank you. And Phil, it's your turn for a 1-minute closing statement.
The people's lawyer has a critical job defending people and our rights, whether it's reproductive rights, access to health care, clean air, our water, or rights against discrimination. This is the only office that can protect the people of Colorado. I've spent my 24 years as a lawyer working on constitutional rights here in Colorado, in our courts of appeals, working at the Supreme Court, working for consumers at the Justice Department, leading cases to protect you, working on regulations here and nationally to protect you. A critical difference in this discussion is whether federal laws, federal rights like reproductive rights, is something that our Attorney General should take on to protect people in Colorado. I've got a simple test. If Coloradans are going to be hurt and their rights violated, I'm going to stand up for you. And I'm going to work hard for you using all the tools in this office, taking on those pharmaceutical companies who lied about opioids to help address the opioid epidemic, managing our water, and working together to solve the challenges. I'm Phil Weiser, and I'd be honored to be your Attorney General.
That is all the time we have for our debate featuring the major party candidates running for Attorney General for Colorado. I'd like to thank our candidates, George Brauchler and Phil Weiser. I'd also like to thank my fellow panelists, Sean Boyd and Eric Sonderman. If you'd like to find out more information about any of this year's general election issues and races, please visit our websites. There's more than a few of them. CPT12.org, CBSDenver.com, KOANewsRadio.com, and ColoradoSun.com. Be sure to stay tuned as we continue our Both Sides of the Story high school debate tournament. Tonight, we continue the semifinals. Students from Mountain Vista and George Washington High School, both high schools, debate if Colorado should offer tax incentives and subsidies to companies who are considering moving to Colorado. You will not want to miss it. For everyone here at Colorado Public Television, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks for watching.